Now, focus stacking has kind of been my passion for the last 9 years, and I basically I started at the as a novice, and I quickly got into the genre, and I've still learning things and still improving things, and I try to introduce you to my domain. So here's an outline of the topics that I'll be discussing this evening. First, I'll give a little bit of my background in photo history. Then I'll show you some recent photo stacking examples, and then go on into why do we photo stack. Well, you can photo stack for landscapes, and you can photo stack for macros, and I'll give some examples. Then we'll talk about photo stacking hardware and software. Then we'll go through my equipment and my lighting, how I sculpt my lighting. Then I'll show you some examples. The first example will be turning the focus ring to march through the various focal planes using the Helicon FB tube. And then we'll go through the processing workflow of Helicon software in order to render or combine all the elements, all the different photos in the stack into one very sharp picture. Then I'll talk about the example of ultra macro, where we use an automatic focusing rail. And finally, I'll talk about all the new modern stuff, the in-camera focus bracketing. And then finally, we'll finish up with some more samples of my images. All right, first my background and history. I retired in 2006 after a 50-year career in physics and engineering. And then for the next 7 years, I was very active physically, and I took snapshot photos with the DLSR. Well, I paid for this activity by developing a very bad back, which kind of made me mobility impaired. And so I had to find something new to do. And I looked around and I decided maybe photography would be something interesting in my future. So I joined the Camera Club in August of 2015 as a novice photographer. And then in December of that year, I had very radical back surgery with a fused 7 vertebrae in my back. So I'm someone with limited mobility, and I needed something to do in photography. So I was searching the internet, and I wanted to find a genre capability with my physical abilities. And so this is in January of 2016. And then I just discovered focus stacking, and I bought a cheap Vivitar macro lens and an inexpensive rail from eBay, and I started to experiment. And I made a small little light box with a cardboard box and 2 lights on either side. And my wife brought me a leaf from a mandibella plant. And then I took the following picture. And I was very lucky because this was a really, really great shot. And this is my first real attempt at focus stacking. Well, I was very excited about this. And I named the picture after the mandibella leaf. I called it the Mandibella Leafscape. And this was February 15th, 2016. And I entered this picture the next month in the competition. And this is the first 5 that I ever got for focus stacking. Okay, now let's go to some of my recent pictures, which really, quality-wise, are the original. Luckily, the original one is kind of comparable to what things I'm doing today. So here's probably the most interesting picture I've ever taken, and I called it Goatsbeard Cathedral. And actually what it is it's a Western salsified seed head, which looks like a giant dandelion, and it's 3 to 4 inches in diameter. And the settings for this were f7.1, and there were 57 photos in the stack. And what I took here is I took a couple of the seeds away from the front of the plant, and I brought the camera inside, and I took the picture, so I got the full splendor of this canopy. And I called it the cathedral because the center part reminded me of an altar, and then the splendor of the outside perimeter just reminded me of a cathedral. So the Goat's Beard Cathedral is the title, and I use Goat's Beard because that they also call it Goat's Beard, and that's a more catchy name for this than Salsify Cathedral. Then I took one of these seed pappuses from this salsify plant, and I sprayed it with water, and all these little droplets formed, and they just kind of like little gems, glistening gems. And I took this picture shortly after I took the other one, and I called this picture Drops. And then we have a ponytail palm plant in our living room, and the leaves, many of the leaves turn brown, and my wife pulls them off and throws them away. And she pulled these leaves off and she left them on the counter. And I took a look at them and I said, "My boy, those ends of those leaves just have beautiful shapes." So I quickly grabbed a number of them, brought them down to my studio, and proceeded to take this picture. Now, I have to admit that I manipulated the position of the leaves after taking them, after the picture, in post-processing in order to get the final composition. But it really turned out to be an interesting shot. And then finally, just this spring, this is early February, when the first snowdrops came out, I grabbed one from the backyard and I brought it in and I took this picture. And this was entered in the competition, in the February competition here. And again, one of the things that I've been trying to do in this, and more recently in my photography, is to work on the backgrounds in order to get very nice lighting and vignetting and softness in the backgrounds, rather than just a pure black background. And this was taken, there are 18 photos in this stack, and I take most of my pictures at f6.3. Okay, let's get now to what is focus stacking. Focus stacking is a digital image processing technique which combines multiple images taken at different focal distances to give a resulting image with an increased depth of field. So you have the depth of field associated with each of the individual photos in the stack, and then when you take the full stack, the depth of the resolution is equivalent to that of the individual depth of field. Now, what genres is this useful? Well, two, basically. Landscapes, but only on occasion. Most of the time in landscapes, you take it take a single shot or an HDR shot, but you use it, you don't change the focus distance. But sometimes in landscapes where you can't get everything within a single shot, then it's useful to take a focus stack. Now, when you go over to a high magnification macro, it becomes absolutely necessary. For magnifications less than the order of 1, some people use very high f-stops and then they over sharpen, but really focus stacking is the way to go. Okay, now a fundamental rule of photography is that quality images almost always have to have a main subject, and at least part of that subject must be in sharp focus. So if you're in landscapes, well, you can't have part of the landscape in sharp focus to be a good shot. Everything has to be in sharp focus. So in landscape, you use a large effective depth of field. And you can accomplish this often with a single frame with a high F number. And you don't want to go too high because if you go too high and too small an aperture, you're going to have diffraction, and this will downgrade the image. And usually you want to keep, for full frames, you want to keep the f-stop left, the order of f16, less than f16, or the order of f16. The APS-C frames, the crop frames, have smaller pixels, and so you basically, the diffraction is more apparent, and you want to stick to less than, say, f13. Now, when you focus stack the landscape, you basically can do this manually just by turning the focus ring manually and take 2 or 4 photos in the stack. Or with the new mirrorless cameras, you can automatically generate them. And if you're doing focus stacking, you should use f-stops to the order of f8, because the optimal performance of a lens, the sweet spot, is usually something between f5.6 and f8. All right, let's go through a scenario for landscape focus stacking. In this particular situation, it's South Island, New Zealand, and the photographer wanted to compose the picture so that he had both the lupines at 3 feet in focus, and also the mountains in the distance, and he wanted the mountains to be large enough to in the composition. At the focal length of 24 millimeters, the mountains just appear too small. So he wanted to compose this at 35 millimeters. Well, at 35 millimeters, the nearest lupines at 3 feet are too close to be sharp at f16. The hyperfocal distance gives you is about 10 something feet, and that means only things from 5 feet out to infinity would be in focus. So he needs to focus stack. Now, one of the problems in focus stacking is when you do it outside in a landscape, if you have wind, and say the motion of if these lupines were moving, then they would move from each of the elements in the stack, and it would screw everything up. It would just mess the image up. So if there's wind out, if there's wind, wind is really a problem in focus stacking outdoors. So here, in this particular case, the photographer took a shot at 3 feet, another at 10 feet, one at 60 feet, and the mountains, and then he brought them all together, and he has this beautiful stacked image where everything is in focus. Okay, let's go to the second example, which is macro photography. In macro photography, the depth of field is often much shallower than depth of field of the object. So again, of course, you want to increase the depth of field. You can do it either by going to a very high f number, or you can do it by doing focus stacking. So let's go first, consider a very small aperture, say f16 to f32. Well, this will work reasonably well for small prints or small magnifications. If your magnification is less than 0.25x, you don't have to focus stack. I'll show you an example in a minute. Now, one of the problems when you do this for the high f numbers, well, the big depth of field means that the backgrounds are also going to be in focus, and that can be rather distracting. And if you go to really high f numbers, well, you're going to really have a problem with diffraction. Now, there's one famous photographer, Mike Moats, who takes everything at f32, and what he does is he just way over sharpens everything, and there's a certain look. Some people like the look. I don't particularly care for it. I think focus stacking is much better, and it's realistic. The over sharpening stuff is not realistic. All right, here's an example of a picture I took with a magnification the order of 1/4 x, and it was taken outside, and it's a moving butterfly. I shot this in manual mode. I had f16, 1/500th of a second, and I had it in auto ISO, and it came out with an ISO of 5,000. Now I'm using a good enough camera that it can handle high noise, but you still have to put it through things like Topaz denoise. So here's the original RAW, and the butterfly looks pretty good, but the background is really distracting. So I cropped it, I put it through Topaz denoise, sharpened it, and then I blurred the background using the algorithm or in Lightroom, also in all. It's the same thing as an Adobe Camera Raw. But you see, there's still some distraction at the background. Well, then I put another hour or so in, and I'm pretty proficient in Photoshop, and I went through fancier extraction methods, and I finally came up with this picture. Now the butterfly here looks very, very sharp, like it was focus stack. The knapweed, well, maybe it would be better for a focus stack, but the background, where I did the background, I put it through a Gaussian blurring in Photoshop, and this is the final result. But again, you have to invest a certain amount of time and develop the skills in Photoshop in order to get final results like this. All right, now let's go to macro focus stacking, where the magnifications are larger and where you have to do focus stacking. A single shot will just not give you the best results. Now, you want to step focus. Now, there are two possible methods of step focusing, that is, marching through all the focal planes. The first one is turning the focus ring. Now, this is really the best one because it gives you perspective. That is, the farther away objects appear smaller. So that's the best method for magnifications less than the order of 1x. Now, the second way is the focusing rail, and the focusing rail moves the camera and the lens through all the different focal planes. So all frames have the same magnification, and you lose perspective. Well, if the object is only a centimeter in depth, it doesn't matter because you can't really discern perspective in that smaller distance. But if it's larger, at some point, well, the focusing rails give very good results. But now if you go to ultra macro, where the magnification is considerably greater than 1x, the rail is the only way possible. And because in part, because ultra macro lenses are all manual, none of them are auto-focusing. So you have to use a rail. Now, next question. How many photos typically in a stack? Well, for small magnifications, it's a large flower arrangement. You'd have about 5 to 10 frames. For a medium flower, 1/2x, you have about 15 frames. Small flowers, 1x, you'd have 25 to 60 frames. Now, if you go to really ultra mag, 5x, well, you're going to need 150 frames. You notice I put f8, f8, f6.3, f2.8. And these are the f values that you use in order to really mitigate any effects of diffraction. When you go to very high magnification, diffraction becomes very apparent, and you have to use very, very wide open apertures. All right, now let's talk about how you can automate the focus stacking. I mean, before we said you can manually turn the lens, or you can have a manual rail, but now let's talk about the automation methods. Now, in turning the focus ring, you have some controller which controls the autofocus motor that turns the focusing ring. Now, the earliest one, I believe, was Helicon Remote. And I started this stuff in 2016, and they had Helicon Remote. And I tried to find out when Helicon Remote was introduced, but the AI program didn't know. So let's assume it's sometime before 2016. And this allowed tethered shooting, and automatic focus bracketing. But the algorithm is suboptimal. The results were good back for the standards of 2016, but they're not up to what you can do today. And Jerry Bishop and I did some experiments about that, and we showed that some time ago. Now, in 2017, Helicon Soft introduced the FB tube, and this can be used for a Canon or Nikon. And if this is programmed properly, it's optimally 100% capable. It'll give you the sharpest image possible. And 2017 again, also in-camera focus bracketing was introduced. And I believe the first one was the Nikon D850, which was a DSLR, not a mirrorless camera. And now all mid to high-end mirrorless cameras have built-in stacking. I believe they call it focus bracketing. And this, again, if you pick the right parameters, it can give you 100% capability. Really, really sharp images. Now, in the rails, that 2010 StackShot introduced a motor controller for a high precision rail, and they could advance that rail at 2 microns, at 0.002 of a millimeter. In 2017, WeMacro introduced out of China, introduced their rail. It's very comparable to the StackShot. It costs half the price, and you can go down to 0.001 of a millimeter. I have the WeMacro rail. Okay, now focus stacking software. That there are a number available. I believe these three are the most popular. And the first one is Photoshop. Now, the Photoshop has changed their algorithm over the years, and they've improved it to the point where I believe it now is at the same quality as the Helicon algorithms. But the problem is it's slow. The workflow is a bit clumsy, but once you learn how to do it, it's okay. And if you're just using Photoshop occasionally, well, that's the one you should go for, because you have Photoshop already, and so you don't have any additional costs. Now, most of us in the camera club who do stacking use Helicon Soft, and this is usually fast. The workflow is relatively easy, and the costs are not excessive. And Xeron Systems is comparable to Helicon Soft, and I know that Bob Llewellyn uses Xeron Systems for his stacking. Now, my macro cameras, my main camera is an older camera. It was the top of the line DLSR, the last DLSR that Canon made, and it's the Canon 5D Mark IV. It has 30.4 megapixels. It does fantastic work. The camera is not the most important thing in the focus stacking. You can get great pictures with a 20 megapixel camera. Now, and also I more recently bought a mirrorless camera, and this is a crop frame camera. It's 32.5 megapixels, but the pixel density is equivalent to an 83 megapixel full frame camera. So this thing is, the sharpness is the pixel density. So this camera is very, very, very sharp. And the negative on a crop frame camera is, of course, that it doesn't perform as well for low noise, for low light and high noise. But when I do my stuff, it doesn't matter. I'm on a tripod all the time. So this thing really works very well, and I'm very pleased with it. All right, now, so you have your cameras, and you can have a wide range of cameras can produce very good results. But the image quality of the system really mostly depends on the quality of the lens. So high quality focus stacking images require high quality prime lenses. But these don't have to be that expensive. They can be obtained at very moderate prices if you go to the used market, especially now. Because with the new mirrorless cameras, they've introduced new lenses that are associated with them, and they've discontinued the old, in Nikon, the old F lenses and the old EF mount lenses have basically been discontinued. And now you can buy these lenses at 20 to 30 cents on the dollar from eBay or other used places. So the used Canon Nikon F or the Canon EF mount lenses are just wonderful, sharp lenses, and with the adapters, they work just as well as the new RF lenses. Now, also some new out of China, they've been producing really very good macro lenses, and these are the Liowa Venus optical lenses, and they run about $400. Now, one of the things you have to worry about is that the older lenses may or may not be compatible with the new mirrorless camera focus bracketing. So most of them are for the Canon and the EF lenses, but the other ones aren't. The Liowa lenses will not be compatible with the mirrorless focus bracketing because the manufacturers don't want to put the proper proper numbers in their computers in order to actually make these things work. They want you to buy their own lenses. All right, here are my lenses. Here I have more than these, but these are the main lenses that I use. This is a Canon EF 180 millimeter f3.5L macro lens, and this at one point was I read it was considered the sharpest lens that Canon made, and now you can buy it. It's discontinued. You can buy it for $500 to $600 on eBay. And one of the great advantages of this lens is this tripod ring, because this way I can rotate continuously at any angle in order to get the best composition on a macro. Now you can have an L bracket, but that only gives you two orientations. This gives you everything, continuous. Now, for the crop frame camera, I bought a macro lens associated with the crop frame, an EFS lens, and this is 60 millimeters. And this is, since it's crop frame, this is equivalent to 90 to 100 millimeters in a full frame camera. And this again is discontinued. And I bought my lens from a Glaser camera in Seattle, and I got almost a brand new perfect lens for $200. And they go regularly at eBay around $275. Lastly, I have this ultra macro lens, which is totally manual. There's no autofocus, and the magnification's from 1x to 5x, and it's really the design is a compound microscope. And this again is discontinued, and you can buy it on eBay for about $675. But you can buy one of the Chinese lenses, which are just as effective for new, I think, for about $400 or $500. All right, now here's my other stacking equipment. I have the Helicon FB tube, which again has to be programmed, and it's a little inconvenient in the fact that once you program it for a particular f-stop, and if you want to change the f-stop, it's a little bit cumbersome to reprogram it. So you're really restricted to using the same f-stop all the time, but that doesn't bother me since I use the same f-stop all the time. I use f6.3 these days. And this is the Wii Macro Rail that I was telling you about. I paid about $300. The price is now going up to about $350, and you better buy it soon if you want one, because with the new Chinese tariffs, I don't know where it'll go. And this is the R7 camera, the Canon's mirrorless camera, and this goes for about $1,300. And this has the automatic stack generation built in. All right, now let's go. This is how I take my pictures. I way back in 2016, I did some research on the internet, and I don't know whether I designed this or I took someone else's design. I don't remember, but I built a light box with with 3/4 inch PVC pipe, and I made a cube, a 20-inch cube of the pipe, and I bought the lights on the 2 lights on either side and 1 light on top, and I estimated for inflation, and I would guess that this total thing would cost today about $65. And I used some velveteen here for the back and the bottom, and I put a white polyester tablecloth over the top, and that's my light box. And then I also added a 10 by 10 inch panel, which today I had to replace it recently, and that cost about $50 on eBay. And this external light is actually quite important, in addition to the other lights. And then for holding the samples, the Wemberley clamp works really well because it clamps right onto the PVC pipe, and you can move it all around the way you want, and move it up and down. And I also have these quad workbench, which is kind of these soldering workbenches. I bought one of these, and this runs about close to $50. Both these are about $50. This is the way I have the lamp set up. See, I have an arm coming out holding the lamp, and I can pivot them various ways, so I can change the lighting by pivoting the various elements of the light. Now also, and originally I did a lot of pictures like this because I realized that Bob Llewellyn's always used a light table, and so this is taking pictures using a tracing tablet, and these are relatively inexpensive, and you just you get backlit macros of relatively flat subjects. Now, I rarely use this anymore. I use the light box just about all the time. All right, let's go through some examples. And the first example, we're going to do stacking by auto-turning the focus ring using the FP tube. Here I've set up the FP tube. You can't see the live view, but I work everything through the live view in the camera. And here are the lights. Here's that external panel. The flower is being held by one of these quad arms, and I put a matte background behind the flower. So the first thing I have is, here's the screen, and you see I have f6.3, ISO 100. I use a single shot spot metering. I'm in manual focusing. And the first thing I do, I look in live view, and I look at the histogram, and I adjust I'm in manual, so I'm adjusting the shutter speed so the histogram is never above 70% level. And this is really important because it's extremely easy to blow out the whites in macro photography. And if you maintain this rule for the histogram, you will rarely ever blow out the whites. Occasionally, you have to even go lower, but 99% of the time, you will not blow out the whites if you maintain the histogram at below the 70% level. All right, so that's the first thing. Now I've attained the proper exposure. I now want to focus so I bring the box from my manual focus up to in front of the nearest point on this particular flower, and I then focus it just in front of the nearest point. So I want to take a few extra pictures, so I'm absolutely sure that I've gotten all the pictures in the stack that I want. Because if I missed it, the front would be slight out of focus. Okay, I'm all set. I then with the FB tube, you press the shutter, and you take each one of the shots, and you can then. Here's the 5th image. Here's the 20th image. You see, I'm watching it as I march through, and then when I'm finished, I can see when it's the last bit of the image, and then I stop. And the step size in this case is about 0.6 millimeters for this particular picture. Okay, now I have all the photos in the stack. I have to go. I want to process this, which they call rendering the stack. So I load the stack into Lightroom, and then I load that from Lightroom. I load the stack into the Helicon software as digital negative files. I don't work with TIFF files. I work with digital negative files. And then it's all in. I press the rendering button, and you can pick one of 3 different algorithms. I usually work with the pyramid algorithm C, and you hit rendering, and then it renders it. It marches through all the different focal planes. It picks the pixels that are in focus in each one of the planes and makes a map so that it retains only those pixels. And then finally you're through, and this is the end image. And this is what the image looks like. This is the focus stack image. This was 39 photos in this stack. Again, taking it at f6.3. Now here's 100% crop, and you notice that I didn't quite take enough pictures. That's a couple of these in the rear are slightly out of focus because I didn't go deep enough. You can see one of the petals here is out of focus. Now, to compare this, let's take a single frame. And again, this is at higher ISO because once you go to f6.32, you can sit there for 30 seconds waiting for the picture to be taken. So, and I put it through Topaz Denoise and Sharpen. And you can see here's a 100% crop, and you can see how sharp how it comes out. I mean, this photo's fine if you want to put it up for a 3x5 photo, or if you want to put it on Instagram, perhaps. But it would still the stacked image would look better on Instagram. Okay, now let's go to the to the rail. And this is my WeMacro rail, and this is you have an app on your smartphone or on the computer which serves as a controller, and you're tethered to the you're not tethered to the camera. You're because you have a Bluetooth connection, and it just runs the motor via the Bluetooth connection. And here's the setup. I'm going to do a 3.5x macro, and in this one I want to go to f4 because of I don't want too much diffraction, and I'm going to wind up taking 34 photos in the stack. And what I want to take a picture of are these little florets. These are the actual flowers of the zinnia. These little florets. And here we go. Here's the rendered the 34 photo stack. And this is a 3.5x magnification image. And then you want to go to 100% crop. You can see now this looks a little fuzzy, but actually it's quite sharp if you look at the edges here. Okay, now for the last mode, let's go to the in-camera generation, in-camera bracketing. Now this will be the dominant future mode. I think everything is going to become obsolete because all the cameras in the future are going to be mirrorless cameras, and they're all going to have the stacking capability built into their internal computers. Now, of course, for the ultra macro, you'll still have to use a rail because you won't have an autofocus motor. Now, let's discuss about what the autofocus motors are. An autofocus motors are stepping motors in the sense they have a primitive step size, and all rotations of the focus ring are measured in digital increments of the basic step. Now, this is really important because the basic step size differ for different lenses. If every lens had the uniform same step size, it would be really simple, but they don't. All right, so therefore, the camera must recognize the lens and have the lens basic step size saved in its computer memory. So you have to check if you're doing bracketing, you have to check to see if it's compatible. If your lens is not compatible and doesn't have the data in the memory, you're not going to get good results. I know, I tried it, and it came out very poor. All right, let's go through. This is for the Canon R7, and I looked at the menus for the Nikon, and everything's very similar. They all do basically the same thing. And so what the user does, the user sets the aperture and then sets the number of photos that he wants to take in the stack. So you have to guess the number of photos. And at first you're going to screw up, and you want to overestimate all the time, because it doesn't matter if you take too many pictures, because they don't really cost anything extra. So after a while, once you understand approximately what the depth of field is, you can have an estimate and approximate the size of your object. You can approximate the size of the number of photos in the stack. All right, so you have to guess the number of photos in the stack, and then you want to check the resolution. That is, how small, how fine do you want the resolution to be? And this is the finest setting. So you have a finest setting from 1 to 10, and you could choose various different resolutions from this. So you have the number of stacks, and this exposure smoothing is just something which, if the exposure changes in between the stack photos, it renormalizes it, so it's the same exposure. Okay, so this is a menu, and now we do the same thing similar to before. We go into live view, and we again look at the histogram, and we make sure that it's less than 70% from the top to prevent the blown out whites. We again doing a manual focusing here to get it to be right in front of the nearest point. So here's my focusing, my manual focusing, and I now focus it, turn the ring so that I'm focused just in front of the nearest point, and then you just press the button and it goes. It quickly runs right through the stack, and the camera computer calculates the initial depth of field, step size, depending on the fineness setting, the f number, the focal length of the lens, and the distance to the front of the subject. so it can precisely calculate the depth of field associated with the resolution that you want. And as the distance changes, the step size is recomputed. So you have this wonderful computer changing things on the fly. So pressed it, it's done, 35 frames, and you're finished. Now let's have further thoughts on this depth of field and finest choice. Now the finest specifies the resolution, and it's actually this is called the circle of confusion, and this probably confuses you. And if you really want a detailed explanation of that, I'd be willing to go through that sometime in the future. Now, this resolution is usually expressed in units of the sensor's pixel size. You choose the finest, the camera computes the corresponding depth of field associated with that finest resolution. Now, I use 2 for the finest, and I've done some experimental studies, and I find that 2 corresponds to a resolution which is about 2.5 times the pixel size. And this is the gold standard of pixel peepers. In the fields of macro photography, the gold standard is that you have the circle of confusion 2.5 times the pixel size. Now, based on photo stack numbers, again, I've done experiments, and what is the change in resolution going from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4? Well, that's just if the number of shots you need increases by 30%, that means that the size of the circle of confusion, the resolution, has also increased by 30%, because so I determined this from going from the different. So you need 30% fewer shots as you go from 2 to 3, and 30% fewer shots from 3 to 4, which means that the depth of field is increased by 30%. Okay, finally, let's go through some of my stacked images, and again, I emphasize that I do the focus stacking very carefully and try to get the optimal sharp results, but I spend a great deal of time in post-processing in order to get the final really image looking not only sharp, but having a certain artistic quality. All right, here's a light box with a white background. This is a Monarda, a B-Bow Monarda, and this is something I did recently, and this is more of some of the artistic effect, where I used this is my light box, and I use a small panel light over here in order to create the shadow, and a great deal of this vignetting, but I also added some of this in Photoshop. And this is going to be a minimalism photo, which I'll be probably next month's assignment, which I'll probably submit for the next month's assignment. Now, historically, I've used a background most of the time, and more recently, I've been going over to matte backgrounds, more so in matte backgrounds. So, but a lot of my pictures are with black backgrounds. So here's my strawberry picture. These are some things, again, that objects that I was in the kitchen. I noticed them and I said, "Why? That would make a great photograph," and grabbed them and brought them downstairs. And this is a garlic, which was in the box with the garlics, and it had sprouted, and I just thought it would make a great picture. This is something which I just took very recently, just a few weeks ago, and I submitted it last month in the competition. And this is onion with sprouts. And this is something which I took a couple of months ago, which is a bowl of blueberries. And I use a reflecting background, affecting base in each one of these two pictures. This is milkweed seed pod, and this is probably the picture I've sold the most in the last couple of years. I must have sold 10 of these. And then again, last year we had an assignment which was on the forest floor. Now I can't get down to the forest floor because if I got down there, I couldn't get up. So I searched around and I found this mushroom, and I took a nice wide shovel and I shoveled underneath it, put it on a pallet, carried it into my light box, and took a side panel light and took this picture with a black background and a side panel light, and this was on my forest floor. The judge thought it was overexposed, but so be it. And this again was taken with a matte background. This was again last fall, out in the meadow, which I love to go to get subjects. They have these Chinese lanterns or physalis growing, and in the fall, the shell loses most of its structure, and it's left with this skeleton shell, which shows this seed inside, and it's also called the ground cherry Chinese lantern physalis. And this I took with a matte background and shown here. And this is a hellebore, which I took this spring. This is first flowers in our backyard in February. And again, I have a matte background, and I did some background replacement and enhancement in this. And so I do this various vignetting, and I usually do this, and you can do it in Lightroom, but once I'm in Photoshop, it's easy to just use Adobe Camera Raw, which is basically the same as Lightroom. So I do that, and I also use some of the Nik software, which is the Color FX Pro software, which gives you nice shaped vignetting with central lighting behind it. You see, I have lit. There's a brighter spots behind the flower. Here are some other ones with matte background. This is a tree peonies seed pods. This was May 1st when the pods were just forming, shortly after the flower expired. And this is how when the seed pods mature. And this is August 27th. And so this again, we have this background where I use all this nice vignetting in order to enhance the image. Okay, now here are some outdoor stacks that I took. This is a Siberian iris from our front yard, and I've taken this at a high enough f-stop so I nicely blurred the background. This is a blue aster that I took at Ivy Creek natural area last fall. The blue asters are blooming there in October. And finally, that about a couple of miles from my house is a big field of teasels, and this was a teasel family that I took. And I have to admit that in Photoshop I did a little bit of moving and fixing these things up so that it came out with a good composition. And again, these were growing in our backyard. These are Columbine or Aqualesia, and titled Aqualesia Duo.